Okay, thanks for watching this video. Some of you watching this video will be regular viewers of the show that Carl and I do, which is a discussion and a chat and a hangout about all things Rolling Stones. In a few of the shows I reference in my chat my reliance back to a couple of books that I have that have been important in developing my understanding of the Stones. And if you look back on the channel, there's a couple of clips where I talk about some of the Beatles books that I own and a quick summary of the book. I'd like to do that with some of the material that I use for my referencing and for my understanding of the Rolling Stones. Now, I just want to make a comment about something before I start. When I was a young guy getting into music, you know, a long time ago, before the advent of social media and YouTube, and I'm sure some of us of a vintage will understand exactly where I'm coming from. It was really difficult to find information about a band or a musician that you liked. It was really difficult. You had a couple of magazines that you could borrow or buy: Rolling Stone magazine, Cream magazine, some of the British magazines, but a lot of the music I was listening to, it was sort of, you know, the Rolling Stone magazine and Cream magazine, and you'd find an article, or you'd have a friend that had an elder brother or sister that may have had a couple of copies of Cream magazine lying around, and you'd devour 2 paragraphs of something. You'd devour someone's review on a album. Here in New Zealand we had a free magazine called Rip It Up, and that was available from the local record shops, and you know, we absorbed that magazine. It was interesting. It sort of focused on the New Zealand independent scene, and at that time new wave and punk rock were really in vogue, and they were the main topics of interest for that magazine. But every now and again you'd have something, you know, there might be something about the Stones or something about Neil Young. I can't recall anything about Eric Clapton in Rip It Up, but yeah, so, you know, getting information was difficult. And then there was this period before the advent of the internet in the early 1990s where a couple of books came out, and they were, you know, they weren't crafted well. There was a lot of, you know, books coming out that had opinions that were based on rumours. You know, there was no interviewing, and you know, they sort of died a death. And I won't mention what these books are because there's no point. But the advent of social media and the internet gave music fans an opportunity to get presented to us a musical journalism that was you know, miles ahead of anything over the last 20 years. You know, you had authors that were going out there doing the research, interviewing, and we were pretty lucky, you know, to have that. And as a result of that, you know, we've got some good books. So I'd like to, you know, talk about some of the Rolling Stones material that I've got, like I said earlier, and I'd like to do a series, a couple of videos on the material that I've got in relation to Eric Clapton. So, in no particular order, this book here, Stanley Booth, True Adventures of the Rolling Stones. I don't know. I'm 50-50 on this book. It took me 3 or 4 reads, attempts to get into it. I don't know why. It's pretty good. The Rolling Stones rate it. Keith is apparently on record saying, yeah, that's how it was. So it captures the time pretty well. I'd recommend this book. And to balance that book is this one here called A Season in Hell with the Rolling Stones by Robert Greenfield. Robert Greenfield's got a couple of other books on the Stones, but I really enjoyed this. This book is awesome. I just love the way that he brought the characters, the characters of the Rolling Stones into this narrative, and the interplay between them. If there's one book that certainly propels you back into this time of exile on Main Street, certainly for me, it's this book, A Season in Hell with the Rolling Stones by Robert Greenfield. The next book, obviously, at some stage, any Stones nut has to read Keith Richards' life. I remember buying this book, jeepers, I think this book came out in 2010. 2010, October 2010. So I got it around Christmas time. And I devoured it. I didn't read it from beginning to end. I just I read chapters of it. And it's just fascinating. It's one of the best biographies I've ever read. And top marks to Keith for taking the time with James Fox and giving it to us. I look forward to the extended version. You know, his reflections on the band over the last 10 years. You know, heck, you know, this is March 2019 and they're still touring. So, yeah, this book is amazing. And I know this series, this episode I'm talking about, is specifically on the printed books I have. We won't talk about the digital books, but there is an audio version of this available, and Johnny Depp reads a couple of chapters. It's pretty good. So yeah, do yourself a favour and download the audio book. Brilliant. The next book, which is a counterbalance to some of the things that Keith talks about, is this one here. Sympathy for the Devil by Paul Trinker, who is a respected journalist, and he knows his stuff. The research that's gone into this book to draw out who this figure of Brian Jones is, it's brilliant. It's 350 odd pages. The research is immaculate. It's just brilliant. If you didn't know who Brian Jones was and you thought that the Rolling Stones was the product of Keith and Mick, this book here will certainly tell you that the Rolling Stones started because of this guy here, Brian Jones. And you know, there's some good discussions on here on how he developed slide playing in Britain, again with no YouTube. How he started cross harp, playing with two harps and different keys. How there's a good argument in here on how he played open tuning, not necessarily an open G, which is what we all know Keith Richards is famous for, but certainly on open D. And I won't say too much about it because you need to read it, but the argument is compelling. So it offers a different interpretation of how Keith Richards, according to Keith Richards, found open tuning. So yeah, do yourself a favour and read Paul Trinker's book. Get hold of that. The next book I'd recommend is, I can't pronounce his name very well, Bill Janowitz, and it's called simply Exile on Main Street. Now these booklets here are, there's a lot of them, I think, and different authors are talking about different albums, but this is fascinating. This is very good. If Exile on Main Street's in your top 3 albums of all time, this guy here gives you a discussion about each song, the background. It's just fascinating. It's mesmerizing. Again, it puts you clearly into that time, and you know, it's written with love by a fan, by a guy like you and I, you know, a guy that loved the album when he was a young guy growing up. He did anything he could to get hold of Exile on Main Street. So yeah, don't miss this book if you ever come across it again. I think it's available in a digital version, but yeah, it's a quick read, only 160, 170 odd pages, but the research is fantastic. The second to last book I want to talk about is this book here called The British Blues Network by a guy called Andrew Kellett. And this book is just amazing too. Andrew Kellett is an academic, and what he's attempting to do with this book is he's trying to use a research model to draw out how blues music travelled from one side of the Atlantic to England, and how a small group of people in England, young guys mainly in England, managed through the interconnection of highways, of a highway, in this circle of how blues music was disseminated within this small tight group, and how people in this blues group viewed themselves and their role in disseminating this new music of American blues. But more importantly, how they articulated the music they were hearing into their own experience and producing this wonderful, wonderful British blues movement, which is just, in my opinion, amazing. It's just phenomenal. It talks about how, blues music was seen as man's music, the masculinity of blues music for a lot of these guys growing up in England. How it gave a sense of freedom to these guys, how it linked into what the government at the time was doing with art schools and trying to bring this idea of creativity from ordinary British families into this new age after the darkness of World War II. I can't recommend this book highly enough. I've got no words for it. It's just it's fascinating. I have read a couple of other reviews online, and a few people have made a couple of criticisms, that he hasn't, spoken about. For example, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. Incidentally, another band I love. But he can't talk about everybody. So he articulates that well in his introduction. He focuses on the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds, Eric Clapton, and Led Zeppelin. And why not? Because these are the rock and roll giants who all had their cradle in the blues movement. So he focuses on those guys and what they were trying to do, and it's fascinating. The last book I want to talk about is this one here, Experiencing the Rolling Stones by David Malvini. And again, this is a book in a series of other experiencing titles: David Bowie, jazz, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles. If you're a guitar player and you want to know how the Stones developed from a blues cover band right through to Some Girls and beyond, this is just fascinating. It talks in depth about the great album Beggars Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street. It talks about the way that they listed songs on their albums and how the songs themselves are in a key, and how the keys of the songs on the albums follow this journey. So you're listening to this album, and it's this conscious plotting of songs and keys, and they're taking you on this wonderful journey. So when you used to listen to these albums and you used to go, wow. Well, that's Keith, Mick, Charlie, Bill, and Jimmy Miller, consciously taking you on that on this trip. So yeah, it talks about the keys of songs, how they develop the song. It's fascinating. There's a discussion there on the riff to Jumping Jack Flash. There's a discussion on the psychedelic turn. A discussion on Keith's open tuning and how and why that works. Again, if you're a guitar player and you've never played open G before, reading a couple of chapters of this book's going to make you want to get a guitar and tune it into open G. So actually I said second to last book actually, but there's two more books. Sorry, I got two more books to talk about. The second to last one is this one here, The Rolling Stones, All the Songs. By, again, I'm not going to try and pronounce these guys, but again, very good. So it's all the songs, and there's a discussion on the history. Again, these guys have done some research. There's some good photographs in here. 700 pages. It gives you the song, the musicians, the technical team of each song, the genesis of the song, the production, and there's also little tidbits here with for Stones addicts, and other bits here like in your headphones at the beginning of the track, and especially between 52 seconds and 1 minute and 12, Charlie's snare drum can be heard vibrating to Bill Wyman's bass note, and that's a discussion about a song called Worried About You. Yeah, it's again, the production and the research of this book is meticulous is the word. Yeah, brilliant. And the last book is Rolling Stones Gear. This is for all the gearheads out there. And I'm happy to say that I'm Facebook friends with a guy called Greg Prevost, who's one of the authors of this book. And if you want to know all about the Rolling Stones, the gear, the guitars, the amps, the basses, the drums, again, this is phenomenal too. It's just, you know, the photographs. They talk about the pickups, which is everything that a gearhead wants to hear. You know, they get that right. You know, P90s, you know, they talk about whatever tubes are being used and what amplifier. They're getting the models of their Vox amplifiers right. And again, we have to appreciate the fact that these guys are guitar players, so they know what they're talking about. A little bit like David here. This guy here is a guitar player, so he knows what he's talking about, which is crucial for guys like us, for people like us who are guitar players of a degree, and we just want to geek out on this stuff. So I appreciate you taking 25 minutes out of your day or evening to watch this. Appreciate your feedback. The next installment that I'll do on Rolling Stones books will be the digital editions that I have now. this isn't the definitive collection that you need. You know, I haven't spoken about, for example, Bull Wyman Stone Alone, but we'll save that for the digital episode, because there's a couple of other books that I have available on digital that I don't have printed copies that need to be mentioned. And then I look forward to sharing with you in a couple of weeks' time a couple of shows on my Eric Clapton stuff. So thanks for watching.